In this chapter, we will be getting an introduction to research within the health and science field. Following this chapter, you will be able to define research and explain the importance of the research question, formulate researchable questions including the independent and dependent variables. You will also be able to describe the sequential steps in the scientific method, which is very important for the research process in itself. You will also be able to explain the concepts of internal and external validity. And lastly, you will be able to differentiate between basic and applied research, quantitative and qualitative research, and experimental and non-experimental research. At many universities, there are opportunities for students to become involved within research. One of the ways is to be actively involved in data collection of a research project under a professor. Another way is to be a participant in a research study such as ones performed in the Exercise and Performance Laboratory at Lindenwood University or any other research studies being conducted in different departments. Both ways will provide you insight on the research process. When we further look into what is research, research is a process of discovering new knowledge and understanding new insights. For example, as you get older, the more protein intake is necessary to maintain muscle mass. Additionally, there might be some sex differences when relating to supplements or exercise intervention. Research helps drive the advancement in most fields and advances our ways of thinking. It also can lead to cultural changes and provide new guidelines for the public. Lastly, discovery through the research process is exciting, stimulating, and engaging. Research is not looking up known information. As previously mentioned, it is the process of discovering new knowledge and understanding new insights. It is also not fact-finding. Research is a structured process for solving problems or answering questions. The best example for today is the vaccine for COVID. Research begins with identification of a question to answer or a problem to solve. Following this course and after reading research articles and finding your own, you will be able to critically read and understand the papers published in research journals. Within the media, this can be misinterpreted where a research study is published and the reporter or news misreports the actual findings of the study. This may be that they do not have the ability to critically read and understand the paper and the small things relating to the actual research process and data collection. Understanding the research process will be a valuable asset and skill to have for your future and your career. If you are continuing your education and going for your master's or possibly your doctorate, you will most likely be required to do a research project such as a thesis, which is mainly performed during your master's, or a dissertation during your doctorate, where you will be collecting data and then publishing those results to the people. Here are some examples of research questions. If you are continuing your education, your thesis or dissertation will be an important piece on adding new knowledge and information in a specific area of your interest that you go to school for. Not only will you be required to do a research project, the other years in graduate school will consist of multiple research studies in itself. One could be a build-up study for your thesis or dissertation, or your other studies might be of similar interests or in the realm of that area. Performing research consistently will provide you an experience and allow you to develop new skills that can be utilized in your career. Throughout the research process, things might get confusing. One is that researchers wear white coats. However, this is not true and is applied to certain individuals depending on their data collection and what field they're in. Another confusing portion is your literature review assignment and your presentation that is due throughout this semester. Technically, this is not research since you are looking up known information or you are actually fact-finding. The purpose, though, is to get you familiar with the different areas of the scientific method, searching articles, writing, reading, and interpreting these articles in itself, and developing new skills along the way. Throughout history, there have been various approaches to solving problems and answering questions. Answers to questions about the unknown have come from culturally rooted beliefs that at the time people considered common sense or common knowledge. An example is that the Earth is in the center and the Sun revolves around it. However, with research and technical advancement, we know that the Earth revolves around the Sun. Other questions and problems deal with authority figures from the past. For example, King Henry I defined a yard, the distance from his nose to his thumb of his straightened right arm. Interestingly, we still utilize this measurement today in the US and defined it as 1 yard. As we evolved, we started to view things differently and applying logical reasoning to solve problems or answering questions. This is considered deductive reasoning and originated with Aristotle, where this reasoning employs a logical syllogism that consists of two or more premises or propositions followed by some sort of conclusion. If both premises are true, then it's logical that the conclusion is also true. So you can see here for the example, premise 1, all knee injuries are painful. For premise 2, Trevor has injured his knee, so therefore we conclude that Trevor's knee is painful. However, if we have one of the premise that is false or somewhat questionable, then the conclusion may also be false or somewhat questionable. So we can see here at our bottom example is that all students are clever, where premise 2 is that Buster is a student, therefore Buster is clever. However, that may not be true in this case. Therefore, we see that deductive reasoning is really dependent on the truth of the underlying premises in itself. Another way of reasoning is inductive reasoning. This begins with an observation about one or more specific cases, and from that deriving a general conclusion about a larger group of similar cases. In the first example, we can see that the premise is every bird that I have seen has wings. Therefore, all birds have wings. Based off the first example, you can see it's pretty clear and straightforward. However, there is a potential issue with this reasoning. And this is demonstrated with the second example, where the premise is my dog is cute. Therefore, all dogs are cute. With inductive reasoning, though, a true premise does not always guarantee a true conclusion, as you can see. Instead, there is some level of probability. Both processes of reasoning, such as the deductive reasoning that we just went over and inductive, are limited when answering questions or solving problems when alone. But together, they form the basis for the development of today known as the scientific method. So let's talk about the scientific method. This method is credited to Charles Darwin, as he incorporated deductive and inductive reasoning into a practical and systematic approach to answering questions. This is a structured, orderly process for conducting a scientific research study. This usually follows sequential steps, which we'll kind of outline in further slides ahead. But this method is utilized not only in exercise science, but also other fields as well. The first step in the scientific method is understanding the problem area. This is to identify the research question. However, to formulate a research question to a certain topic, you must have a thorough understanding of the topic and be aware of the findings other researchers have already published in this topic. Looking and reading the literature will help you with the first step. If interested in creatine and effects on muscle, you'll need an understanding of itself and the surrounding issues, such as how many grams per day to take, where can it be found naturally, such as in foods, what are the negative side effects, and etc. By reading the known literature out there and what researchers have discovered, this will help refine your understanding and help better prepare yourself when conducting a research study. It will also help your study design be stronger so you can say that you are confident in your findings. In the second step, this is where you really focus on identifying the research question. The question should be important enough that an investigation is needed to gain new knowledge within this topic. The question should be very specific. How you collect, analyze, and interpret the data is very important. We'll touch on how to analyze certain variables later within the semester. The research question should have independent and dependent variables on which you're studying. The independent variable is what the researcher wants to study, while the dependent variable is what the researcher will measure to provide evidence. So sticking with our example on creatine, a research question may be what are the effects of creatine monohydrate and muscle mass in elderly women? Or what is the optimal way to water a plant for growth based off the picture in this slide? Out of those examples, which is the independent variable and which is the dependent variable? Another way to question or pretty much word the question is to say the purpose of the study is to, and whatever your research problem is, that's what you would write the rest of the way. And the third step is where we formulate a hypothesis. A research hypothesis is an educated guess as to what the outcome of the study will be. It is not a feeling or a guess, but an intelligent expectation based on a thorough understanding of a research problem area. For example, we hypothesize that creatine monohydrate will help build muscle in elderly women and attenuate sarcopenia. Researchers should be able to explain in detail the rationale for this hypothesis. This is usually based on the existing literature. Hypotheses can be either accepted or rejected based on the results. The fourth step is planning the methodology for the study. This is a very important aspect of the scientific research study. This includes what the researchers will need to do and what specific order to conduct the research. Think of this as baking an award-winning pie. There are specific ingredients, measurements, time to bake, and oven temperature to get it perfect. If you are missing an ingredient or not providing a certain step in the research process, this cannot be replicated for future studies. During this step, the researchers will need to figure out how many groups, individuals, the age range, sexes, possibly history of resistance training or aerobic training, how many measurements will be taken throughout the course of the study. Is it pre and post measurement, meaning before and after the intervention, or are they also going to incorporate a midpoint as well throughout the study? How are they selecting the participants, such as the certain criteria? What are the protocols for each specific group? What is the equipment and testing measurements or the instruments they are going to be using? And then lastly, what is the statistical test to analyze the actual data itself? Also, when planning a study, researchers must consider internal validity and external validity. Internal validity is to which any changes measured in the dependent variables can be directly attributed to manipulation of the independent variables. So going with our example, creatine monohydrate, which is the independent variable, will have an impact on muscle, which is the dependent variable, in elderly women. To have good internal validity, researchers will try to control all extraneous factors that might affect the dependent variables. External validity is the extent to which the results of a study can be generalized to the sample population. Good external validity is primarily based on making sure that the study participants are representative of the population, meaning they study enough participants for this research study. If there were only 3 elderly participants in the creatine study, then that would not be applicable to all elderly women. Additionally, if there were 3 young women in the study, then that would also not be applicable to the population as well. The fifth step is collecting the data. Data is recording observations, which can take many different forms. You can collect data using a computer-linked laboratory apparatus that records the values. You can also distribute questionnaires, you can conduct interviews, and also you can even write in values on a data sheet that's tailored to your specific research study. Researchers should collect the data within a study objectively while maintaining the same procedures. The participants should receive the exact same instructions so they do all the same things during the study protocol. This ties in with step 4 of the methodology and is very important because if other researchers were to repeat the study using the same protocol but with different participants from the same population, they would get the similar results as you. However, researchers must carefully control the data collection procedures and fully describe them when writing the paper for journal publication for other researchers. Step 6 is analyzing the data with statistical tools. This is often utilizing SPSS, a program to run various tests depending on study design and the questions you are asking. SPSS is probably the most widely used for running these statistical tests, but there are also other programs as well. But this step is also a vital component to the research process because running the inappropriate tests will give you different results which can be misinterpreted and misleading. The statistical tests that analyze the data factor in the amount of data collected, the variability in the data, the differences in group means to determine whether differences between groups are existing, or if correlations between factors are likely to exist. Later in the semester, we will be going over different statistical tests and having assignments on them to get you some experience on running these tests itself. After you analyze the data using the appropriate tests, interpreting and discussing the results of the study is one of the most interesting and challenging components of the research process. During the discussion portion, you will usually talk about whether the results do or do not support the original hypothesis. Also, you will be comparing the findings of the study you just conducted to the findings of other similar studies. In the discussion, providing reasons why the findings are important can be useful, and also pointing out what practical or clinical applications it may have can also be useful. Not only can it be useful to the researchers out there, but it can also be useful for developing future research studies as well. The conclusion of a study is one or more concise statements that concentrate the main findings or results of the study. This is often the take-home message of the information. You can think of this take-home message as if you were trying to explain it to your grandma who has no idea. So basically with this is just giving your grandma or individuals who don't know the area some generalization. The conclusion shouldn't be making an outrageous claims that you see on supplement ads or anything that is geared towards the whole population. But what should be done is that the researchers should relate the conclusion back to the original hypothesis of the study. The scientific research process is often cyclical. You can see this depicted in this figure where after the results of a study, it can lead to a follow-up study or new research comes out of it. Due to this nature, researchers will become known for their work in a given topic area since each new study builds on the findings of a study previously conducted in their department or their lab. So if you're going to graduate school, in particular pursuing your doctorate, you will be mainly researching a specific area. And this area can be pretty much different ranges. It can be skeletal muscle, it can be the cardiovascular system, the nervous system, it can be biomechanics, sports performance, whatever your main interest is when going to graduate school itself. For me, during my doctorate, that was skeletal muscle, such as lifting weights and muscle growth and that interaction, and also blood flow restriction training. We will also see this kind of known research will become known for the work also through their students. So if your mentor is pretty much known for skeletal muscle work or nutrition, you'll also kind of continue that lineage along with your students as well. Although the previous figure seems straightforward, a missing piece in most research work that isn't mentioned in the scientific method is the pilot study. A pilot study is a small-scale test study in which a researcher tries out a protocol on one or a few subjects to make sure that the planned procedures are workable, that the data collected can address the research question, and that it's worth the actual time to conduct the study itself. Basically, this is where to work out all the kinks such as the timing of the measurements, how long it takes for each session, how many people are needed to help, etc. Additionally, this might also help come up with new ideas for the study, such as needing another time point or adding another measurement. When we look into theories or theory, these really mean educated guess, hunch, or hypothesis. A scientific theory is an explanation of some aspect of the natural world that is based on numerous research studies, all confirming a given phenomenon. When a hypothesis has been thoroughly tested and can explain a cause-effect relationship, it then becomes a theory. The strength of this is based on the extent to which it has been tested under different conditions. Theories can be improved and refined as more research is conducted and as better technology is developed to help measure certain variables. In general, theories are used to help advance our scientific knowledge as well as for applied purposes such as treating diseases. When looking into research, there are different types. Different areas will utilize research such as the social sciences, history, and philosophy. However, the approach has become a bit more specialized in different areas. Most research performed in biomechanics, exercise physiology, and sport medicine follows the scientific method in which we just went over. However, research in pedagogy, sport psychology, and sport management sometimes follow different models or patterns known as paradigms. Paradigms are philosophical or theoretical frameworks. The type of research can be categorized based on characteristics of the research. This includes the general purpose, the nature of the independent and dependent variables, and the funding source. These are not mutually exclusive, so really any given research study could be labeled differently. We will cover some of the major research categories in the upcoming slides. You may have heard the terms basic research and applied research by the media. Many people will tend to think that basic research is work carried out by scientists in white lab coats in a laboratory setting, often with animal subjects, while applied research is thought as field research that is carried out in settings where there is a lack of experimental control. It is important that both basic and applied research do not denote differences in the methodological approach, but it's the underlying rationale for conducting research in the first place that makes the difference. When we look at the definitions, basic research is defined as conducting purely for the discovery of new knowledge with little regard for whether there is an immediate application for that new knowledge, while applied research is driven by the need to find a solution to a specific problem. Out of this research, a part of this process can also be funding. Research funding is to help pay for participants, equipment, measurements, and a variety of other things. In order to receive funding, researchers have to write a proposal for their project with a compelling rationale that convinces the people who are authorized to grant the funding that their project is worthy. And this funding can range from $500 up to millions of dollars. It all depends on what government agencies that they're applying to and how big of pretty much their goal is and how much money they need for their project. Another aspect of research is translational research. This is specific studies in which the results of basic research studies or animal studies are subsequently investigated in humans. This is common for research within the clinical application to start with animal subjects to ensure the safety and efficiency of the research protocol or even drug before applying it to humans. Most of the animal studies are conducted in mice, but other animals can also be utilized. Most of the research conducted in exercise physiology is translational in that it explores whether the results of animal studies can be applied or translated to humans. Quantitative and qualitative research is another way to perform research depending on your research question and area. These type of research is based on whether the dependent variables measured are numerical or non-numerical. Most research in kinesiology follows the quantitative approach. Quantitative research designs enable description of existing conditions, analysis of relationships among different variables, and study of cause-effect relationships. This usually begins with identification of one or more research questions and related hypotheses that can be tested through collection and statistical analysis of numerical data. For this, the study is carefully planned in advance, and a lot of effort is to try and control factors other than those being studied. Generally, a large number of observations or data are collected so that the results can be viewed as indicative of the status of the population at large that the study participants represent. When looking at qualitative research, this is often employed in anthropology and sociology fields. Qualitative research is characterized by the collection of observations by the researchers through first-hand, on-site note-taking, analysis of video tapes and audio tapes, in-depth interviews, and researcher-designed questionnaires. Qualitative research is generally not practical to formulate hypotheses or necessarily even a detailed methodology prior to the research study, since the characteristics of the practical setting and the study participants may influence the ways in which data collections can be processed. Instead, data is evaluated for trends or patterns that address the general questions that research is attempting to address. Some studies may utilize both quantitative and qualitative approaches for assessing different dependent variables. Utilizing both approaches is termed mixed methods. Continuing on with different types of research, experimental research is the investigation involving manipulation of independent variables to establish or disestablish a cause-effect relationship. In addition, experimental research questions aim at achieving an understanding of the phenomenon being studied. A hallmark of experimental research is that the researchers are able to manipulate one or more independent variables and measure the effects of the independent variables on the dependent variables. If a study is designed with good internal validity, which we talked previously, any changes in the dependent variables can be attributed to the manipulation of the independent variable, and thus a cause-effect relationship is shown. Descriptive research is non-experimental because it does not involve any manipulation of independent variables by the researchers. The goal of descriptive research, or how it is defined, is to provide a useful description of certain characteristics of interest in a population, group, or individuals. A descriptive study may be quantitative, qualitative, or both. Remember, when we're talking about quantitative and qualitative combined together, that is called mixed methods. Questionnaires and interviews may be used to collect qualitative and quantitative descriptive data, and a laboratory device may be used to collect quantitative descriptive data. Furthermore, research designed to describe a certain individual who has special characteristics or conditions or responded very well to a clinical treatment is termed a case study. You may have heard the term correlational research. This is a form of descriptive research that can be conducted to evaluate the relationships between two or more variables. An example of correlational research is that regular exercise has been shown to be positively correlated with VO2 max and negatively correlated with body fat, heart rate, and diastolic blood pressure. Another way correlational research is used is to investigate the relationship between two different variables of interest for purposes of prediction. So an example for this is that jump height is an indication of power generating capability, and that measuring jump height through vertical jump testing might be able to predict sprinting ability. It is very important to remember that correlation is not necessarily an indicator of causality. And I'll repeat, it is very important to remember that correlation is not necessarily an indicator of causality. The last type of research that we'll talk about is analytic research. This is a form of descriptive qualitative research that involves systematic evaluation of existing information with the goal of advancing new understanding of that information. A meta-analysis is a form of analytic research which takes on a quantitative approach for analyzing a body of published literature when there are papers with results supporting opposite sides of a certain research question. A meta-analysis is somewhat similar to a review paper, however, it is providing some statistical test to it. When we look and compare it to the review paper is based on the author's interpretations. However, we'll later look at different types of analytic research and discuss this later throughout the semester. In this lecture, we went over logic, the steps in the scientific method, and went over different types of research. There are two major points that research in kinesiology and the health sciences are important. First, much of the research currently being conducted has implications for advancing the related discipline-specific professions, as you can see some listed here on this PowerPoint slide. But more so, the research that has been conducted in future studies have implications for improving human health. This ranges from attenuating muscle loss while aging, nutrition and exercise interventions, ways to lower blood pressure, different ways to help attenuate bone loss and osteopenia, etc. By the end of the semester, you will be knowledgeable about research methods. You'll be able to critically think and how to read journal articles appropriately, write effectively, and gain a better understanding of how the research is conducted. Just a reminder, please have the introductory assignment and Exercise Science 275 intro survey done by August 28th. For the intro survey for this specific class, please go under the quizzes in Canvas and you'll see it labeled as EXS 275 intro survey. Also, just a reminder that quiz 1 will be due by Monday, 11:59 p.m. through Canvas on August 30th. This is just covering the material that we went over during this week's lecture. And again, just a friendly reminder, always refer to the syllabus throughout the semester on relating to quizzes, exams, and assignments.